Imagine this. It's night. No moon. A thick mist crawls across the ground. Thousands of soldiers stand in silence, hands gripping weapons, eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. They are waiting for the enemy. Every sound feels closer than it really is. Every shadow looks alive. Every breath smells of cold air and gunpowder. Tonight, they believe, a battle will begin. But history is about to do something cruel. Because on this night, the enemy will never attack. On this night, the army will destroy itself. History usually teaches us simple rules. The larger army wins. Better weapons decide battles. Discipline brings victory. But sometimes history breaks its own rules. Sometimes the deadliest force on a battlefield is not the enemy. It is fear, confusion, and a single moment of panic. This is not a story of heroism. There are no glorious charges, no legendary victories. This is the story of how an imperial army, fully armed, fully prepared, collapsed from the inside. Not because it was weak, but because it could not understand itself. Picture this army. It is powerful, massive, feared, but it is also divided. Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Italians, Croats. Different languages, different commands, different fears. They march under one flag, but they do not speak with one voice. And in the darkness of night, that difference becomes deadly. Now imagine you are one of them. You hear shouting in the distance, gunfire. Someone yells something, but you don't understand the words. Is it a warning, an order, or a scream? Your heart races, your hands shake. Someone next to you fires. So you fire too. Because in the dark, hesitation feels like death. And in that moment, the enemy doesn't need to be there. There are nights in history where an army is already defeated before the first battle begins. Because fear kills discipline. Because panic spreads faster than orders. Because one misunderstood word can turn thousands of men into enemies. This is a real story, not a legend, not an exaggeration. In 1788, during a war between empires, an army camped near a quiet town called Karánsebes. By morning, thousands were dead or wounded. Cannons had fired on friendly lines. Soldiers had trampled each other in terror. And the most shocking truth? The enemy hadn't even arrived. Tonight we return to that darkness, step by step, shot by shot, fear by fear. Because this is not the story of a battle. This is the story of the night an army destroyed itself. The year is 1788. The year is 1788. Europe is restless. Empires are tense. Borders are fragile. At the center of this growing pressure stands the Austrian Empire, one of the largest military powers of its time. Across the frontier lies its long-standing rival, the Ottoman Empire. War is inevitable. Austria does not enter this conflict unprepared. Its army is massive, well-armed, experienced. But beneath the surface, there is a weakness, one that cannot be fixed with cannons or muskets. This army is not unified. The Austrian Imperial Army is not a single nation's force. It is a mosaic. Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Italians, Croats, Romanians. Each group speaks a different language, follows different traditions, understands commands differently. In daylight, this is manageable. At night, it becomes dangerous. In the late summer of 1788, Austrian forces move eastward into what is now modern-day Romania. Their objective is simple: stop the Ottoman advance. Secure key river crossings, prepare for a major confrontation. Near a small town called Karánsebes, the army sets up camp. It is meant to be temporary, a place to rest, to reorganize. But tension hangs in the air. The soldiers know the Ottomans are nearby. Scouts report movement. Rumors spread faster than facts. No one knows exactly when or where the enemy will strike. Every sound becomes suspicious. Every shadow feels hostile. Fear quietly settles into the camp. Commanders issue orders, but orders must travel through translators, through officers who speak different tongues, through exhausted men who barely trust one another. A command shouted in German means nothing to a Hungarian soldier. A warning in Hungarian sounds like chaos to a Croatian unit. This is not just an army. It is dozens of armies forced to move as one. Night approaches. Torches flicker. Guards take their positions. The army waits, not knowing that it is standing on the edge of one of the most absurd disasters in military history. Because this time, the greatest threat will not come from the Ottoman lines. It will come from within the camp itself. This is the setting. This is the year. This is 1788. And this is the fragile moment just before discipline collapses into panic. It doesn't begin with a battle. No trumpets, no war cries, no enemy banners in the distance. It begins quietly, too quietly. Late into the night, a small unit of Austrian cavalry is sent forward. Their task is simple: scout the area ahead of the camp. They move cautiously, boots muffled by soft ground, weapons lowered, eyes scanning the dark. They expect ambush. They expect Ottomans. What they find instead is something far more dangerous. A few flickering lights appear in the distance. At first, the riders freeze, then they approach slowly. No enemy formation, no weapons raised, just local merchants, civilians, and something else: barrels, alcohol. The soldiers dismount. They laugh. Tension drains from their bodies for the first time in days. Someone drinks, then another. The cold feels warmer. The fear fades. For a moment, the war disappears. But war never truly disappears. Another unit approaches. Infantry this time. They see the horses, the barrels. They understand immediately. They want to share. The cavalry refuses. Words turn sharp. Voices rise. In the darkness, insults sound like threats. Someone shoves someone else. A bottle breaks. Then, a gunshot. No one knows who fired it. No one knows why. But it changes everything. The sound explodes through the camp. Guards jump to their feet. Drums beat alarms. Men grab weapons without orders. Someone screams, "The Turks are attacking!" The words are shouted in German. Half the camp doesn't understand them. They only hear panic. Shadows move between tents. Torches swing wildly. In the confusion, soldiers see shapes moving toward them. They don't see uniforms. They see enemies. Shots ring out. Cannons are rushed into position. A cavalry unit charges straight into friendly infantry. Officers try to stop it. They shout commands. But commands mean nothing when spoken in the wrong language. One unit advances, another retreats. They crash into each other. Someone trips, someone falls, someone fires. Now panic takes control. Not strategy, not discipline. Fear. Horses scream, men run. Others freeze and shoot at anything that moves. The night fills with smoke, screams, and confusion. This is no longer a skirmish. It is a full collapse. An army tearing itself apart in complete darkness. And the most tragic truth? There is still no enemy present. Not a single Ottoman soldier has attacked. This destruction, every shot, every death, is entirely self-inflicted. This is the moment history turns. Not because of courage, not because of genius, but because of confusion, language, and a single unplanned gunshot. Fear does not arrive all at once. It spreads, quietly, invisibly, like smoke in the dark. After the first gunshot, confusion turns into terror. Soldiers wake from sleep. Others drop their food. Hands reach for weapons before minds can catch up. No one knows what is happening, only that something is terribly wrong. A scream cuts through the night. The Turks are here!" The words echo across the camp, but they are shouted in German. To many soldiers, they mean nothing. They hear only the tone. Fear has a universal language. Men run toward the sound. Others run away from it. Units collide in narrow paths between tents. Torches fall. Fire spreads. Shadows grow larger and more threatening. Every moving shape looks hostile. Orders are shouted, but the orders come in different languages. German commands, Hungarian replies, Croatian confusion. Nothing aligns. What should calm the army only accelerates the panic. Someone fires again, then another. Soon, dozens of muskets are firing blindly into the darkness. Cannon crews, half awake, terrified, load and fire without clear targets. The thunder shakes the ground. Men scream, Not from enemy blades, but from friendly fire. Horses panic. They rear and break loose. Some charge directly into infantry lines. Soldiers are trampled. Others fall into ditches or stumble into rivers in the dark. Many never come back out. At this point, fear is no longer a reaction. It is in control. No officers can stop it. No discipline survives it. Each man now fights not for victory, but for survival, against an enemy that does not exist. The battlefield has no front line, no direction, just chaos. A man sees movement, he fires. Another hears a scream. He fires. Every sound becomes a threat. Every second feels like the last. And somewhere in the darkness, the truth remains unchanged. There are no Ottoman soldiers attacking. The army is destroying itself, shot by shot, step by step, fear by fear. This is the wave. Once it begins, nothing can stop it. Not courage, not rank, not numbers, because fear does not listen. And that night, fear became the deadliest force on the battlefield. By the time anyone realized what was truly happening, it was already too late to stop it, because the army was no longer acting as a single force, but as thousands of terrified individuals, each trapped inside his own fear, each reacting not to commands or strategy, but to instinct alone. The night had swallowed all structure. Units were no longer units. Lines no longer existed. Officers shouted until their voices broke, but their words dissolved into the darkness, lost among gunshots, screams, and the thunder of cannons that were now firing without purpose, without targets, without control. Soldiers ran, not forward, not backward, but in every direction at once, colliding with one another in narrow paths between tents, tripping over bodies they could not see, firing at shadows simply because standing still felt more dangerous than pulling the trigger. Horses, driven mad by noise and fire, broke free from their restraints and charged blindly through the camp, crushing men under their hooves, dragging equipment, toppling cannons, turning panic into physical destruction that no human voice could calm. Some soldiers fled toward the nearby river, believing escape lay in darkness and distance, only to slip on muddy banks, fall into cold water weighed down by armor, and disappear beneath the surface without a single enemy blade ever touching them. Others barricaded themselves behind wagons and earthworks, firing endlessly into the night, reloading with shaking hands, convinced that survival depended on never stopping, never listening, never questioning whether the enemy they feared was even real. At this point, the army was no longer collapsing slowly. It was unraveling completely. Fear had replaced command. Noise had replaced order. Instinct had replaced reason. And with every passing minute, the destruction multiplied itself, because each new scream created another. Each shot invited 10 more, and every attempt to flee only spread panic to the next group of exhausted, half-awake soldiers. Some officers tried one last time to restore control, standing exposed in the chaos, waving swords, shouting orders, only to be cut down not by an enemy, but by their own men who saw only movement, only threat, only something that had to be stopped immediately. By the time the firing finally slowed, not because calm had returned, but because exhaustion had taken over, the camp was unrecognizable. Weapons lay abandoned. Bodies covered the ground. Smoke hung heavy in the air. And still, there was no enemy. No Ottoman banners. No advancing lines. No victorious assault. Just silence. A silence filled not with relief, but with the unbearable realization that an entire army had shattered itself without ever facing the force it feared. This was not defeat in battle. This was collapse. Total, irreversible collapse. And when dawn finally approached, it would not reveal the aftermath of combat, but the consequences of fear allowed to rule unchecked. When the sun finally rose over the ruined camp, it did not reveal the aftermath of a great battle, nor the marks of an enemy's victory, but instead exposed something far more unsettling. The quiet, undeniable evidence of how fear, confusion, and human fragility can dismantle even the most powerful structures without a single external force ever striking them. What lay scattered across the ground were not the remains of a defeated army, but the consequences of a system that had mistaken size for strength, numbers for unity, and weapons for control. Forgetting that an army is not held together by steel or uniforms, but by understanding, trust, and the fragile thread of communication that, once broken, cannot be replaced in the heat of chaos. History often tells us that empires fall because they are invaded, because they are overpowered, or because their enemies grow stronger. Yet nights like this remind us that collapse frequently begins long before the enemy arrives. In the moments when fear is allowed to speak louder than reason, when panic moves faster than orders, and when individuals are left alone inside massive systems that no longer protect them or guide them. The soldiers who fired into the darkness were not cowards, nor were they reckless monsters blinded by bloodlust, but ordinary men placed into extraordinary pressure, trained to react instantly to danger, yet stripped of the clarity needed to understand what that danger truly was, until survival instinct overwhelmed discipline and reflex replaced thought. This is the uncomfortable truth history rarely celebrates. Disaster does not always require evil intent, nor does tragedy demand malicious leadership, because sometimes all it takes is exhaustion, miscommunication, and one moment where fear goes unchallenged, allowed to multiply unchecked, until it becomes more powerful than any general, any strategy, or any plan carefully drawn on a map. The night the army destroyed itself teaches us that complexity without coordination is not strength, but vulnerability. That diversity without shared understanding becomes fragmentation, and that command without communication is little more than noise swallowed by darkness. It shows us that systems, no matter how grand, are only as strong as their weakest point of trust. And when that trust erodes, when soldiers no longer believe that the voice beside them is an ally rather than a threat, the battlefield ceases to exist as a place of organized conflict and transforms instead into a landscape of individual fear, where everyone fights alone against shadows of their own making. Perhaps the most haunting lesson of all is that the destruction did not end with the last gunshot, because the damage carried forward into memory, into doctrine, and into the silent realization shared by those who survived that they had witnessed something worse than defeat. They had seen meaning dissolve. An army can recover from loss, can rebuild after retreat, can even rise again after humiliation. But recovering from internal collapse is far more difficult, because it forces a confrontation not with an external enemy, but with the truth that the greatest threat was never outside the camp at all. History remembers battles by dates and names, by victories and losses, by flags raised or lowered. Yet it is nights like this, unrecorded in heroic songs, uncomfortable to immortalize, that carry the deepest warnings for every generation that follows. They remind us that power without cohesion is fragile, that fear spreads faster than fire, and that when leadership fails to account for human limits, for exhaustion, confusion, and language, the result is not merely disorder, but irreversible collapse. This lesson reaches far beyond armies and empires, because the same forces that destroyed this camp operate quietly within societies, institutions, and even individuals, waiting for moments of stress to reveal fractures that were always there but never addressed. And so the true lesson of that night is not about war at all, but about the conditions under which humans lose the ability to recognize one another as allies, choosing instead to act on fear alone until the damage they inflict cannot be undone. History does not tell this story to shame those soldiers, nor to mock an army that fell without an enemy's blade, but to warn us, calmly, relentlessly, and without mercy, that the line between order and chaos is thinner than we ever want to believe, and once crossed, it offers no easy return. This is why that night still matters, because it proves that the most devastating defeats are not always delivered by those who oppose us, but by what we allow to grow unchecked within ourselves when fear is given command. History isn't just battles and victories. Sometimes it's warnings. If stories like this made you think, hit like. If you want more forgotten moments, hidden disasters, and the lessons history tried to teach us, subscribe, because the past doesn't repeat itself. It reminds us.